I want to welcome you to the program this morning, and I think you all know me by now, or most of you do. It's been a few years since I've been there. I've enjoyed coming out, talking to the group in person over the years. I hope when all of this is done, we will once again be able to get together. What I've always enjoyed very much so was the question and answers that we've had. We've always had some great discussions after the talk is given, and we'll have some availability for questions at the end of this. So if you want to type a question into the chat box, feel free to do that. I will do that, and I think you'll all be given the information, but you'll also be able to just send me an email at joel@naroffeconomics.com if we don't get a chance to answer your question, or if you don't have a chance to type one, or you haven't thought of one. If something comes up, just do not hesitate to send me an email. I'll be more than glad to respond to you on anything you may be interested as far as that's going. Okay, we ready to get going as far as the talk is concerned? So let me talk to you and tell you what I'm going to be doing today. That's a little bit different than normal. Obviously, 2020 wasn't normal, so why should we start off 2021 with anything that's usual? I mean, typically what I do is I give you an economic forecast. I'll take a look at the issues that are at hand, what's been happening, and what it all means as far as the economy is concerned for the year ahead, and maybe even further than that. And I usually start off with the nation and then drill that down to the state and the Ocean County area. This year it's going to be a little bit different, and it really has to be a little bit different because nothing about last year was absolutely the same. Instead of coming up with a typical forecast, I think we need to step back a little bit and ask the question, what does what do all of the factors and the changes and the issues that we faced during 2020 mean for the economy and in the short term, but also in the long term? There are some nearer term issues that we have to deal with and factors that we have to face, but there are also some larger, longer term changes that may have occurred and may have been put in place that we have to consider, because that they are going to affect the economy, not just the national economy, but very much so local economies, even more than their impacts on the national economy itself. And so that's what I want to do, is I want to try to take a little bit of a bigger picture view of the trends, the factors, the good, the bad, and the truly ugly that has come out of 2020, and discuss what that may mean for the economy and for you and your businesses here in the Ocean County region. Okay, so let's get going, and let's start with the good, because actually there are some good things that are going on right now as far as the economy is concerned. It's not necessarily that they derived from good things, but where we stand as far as the economy is concerned, there are some good things in play right now that we have to consider. The first thing is to keep in mind that the economy and the virus are basically handcuffed together. The breakout of the virus early last year, February, and especially as it began to grow dramatically in March, led to the shutdowns. And the shutdowns created the largest decline in the economy in history. When I say in history, on record, if we can, in measurable time frames. And if you go back, even estimates that were made of things that may have gone on in the 19th century, in the mid 1880s, 1800s, it looks like the second quarter decline that we had may have been the largest ever. But as things began to reopen, starting in May, accelerating in June, and then getting going through the summer, because the decline was largely due to artificial factors. I say artificial factors. The factors that were driven by the virus in order to get it under control, that were caused by governments needing to put restrictions on the way businesses operated. That led to the largest decline. As those businesses reopened, even if they didn't reopen fully, and a lot of businesses didn't reopen fully as we moved through the summer, what we wound up with was the largest increase in the economy, annualized increase in economic growth in the third quarter that we'd ever seen. But we're still several percentage points below where we were a year ago. We're essentially 10 million workers down. The unemployment rate is over 3 percentage points above where it was in February of 2020. So we still have a way to go, if not a significant way to go, to get us back to where we were so we can start moving forward again. Remember, we haven't, despite the huge increase in the third quarter of last year, and what looks like a decent, if not strong, increase in the fourth quarter of last year, we still have a very, very long way to go just to get back to even. So how are we going to get back to even? Well, that depends on some of the factors that are at work, and we do have a couple of fairly good-sized trends that are in place, and issues and policies that are in place that will help us get there. Maybe the biggest one, the most important one, because as I started this off with by saying that the economy and the virus are linked together, and as the virus goes, so goes the economy. We can never fully reopen until this virus is under control. Well, science is coming to and has largely come to the rescue. It isn't there, but we have 2 vaccines that have already been approved. We have more that are soon, hopefully within the next 2 or 3 months, that will be finalized and may be approved. And as the country becomes vaccinated, what will happen are economic issues and economic factors will be at work. Most importantly, it'll affect both household and business confidence, which right now is very depressed. It's depressed for a number of reasons, but it's largely depressed because we don't know when we're going to get out of this. As we start vaccinating, and as that vaccination process moves forward and picks up speed, then consumer confidence will rise. Workers will be feeling that their jobs are more secure, that the economy will continue to grow. And as the confidence picks up, spending will pick up. So we'll be able to get more spending as we move through the spring and into the summer, as the numbers of people who are vaccinated improves. So that's the first thing. And that has to continue, and it has to continue at a greater pace. But it's not just households that will be affected by it. If you're a business person, and you all are, if you're looking to invest, if you're looking to expand, if you're looking to grow, which you would tend to do in a normal economy, you look out into the future and you ask yourself, is this a good time to do that? Well, right now, because of all the uncertainty that's created by the virus, most businesses, especially bigger business, but smaller businesses who are just trying to hang on at this particular point, are not willing to make a big bet on borrowing money to invest. So when we take a look at the investment numbers, they're down, and they're largely down because if we look at the business confidence levels, they're low as well. If you're uncertain about the future, you don't invest. So what the vaccine does is it says to the business community, okay, maybe right now is not the best economy, but if I look out a year or two from now, we should be largely behind us as far as the virus is concerned. And I'm not going to be bringing an expansion on immediately. It takes 6, 12, or if I'm building a new plant or something, it could take 2 or 3 years to do that. If I see that looking outward a year or two, things are going to be a lot better, I'm going to be changing my views on what investment is concerned. And so the vaccine and the first 2 vaccines that improved and hopefully more, and as the vaccination process continues and starts getting to more and more people, that will trigger a rise in consumer confidence, a rise in business confidence, a rise in spending, and a rise in investment. And that's probably the most important thing that's out there. In the shorter term, though, the second most important thing is that we had a second stimulus bill. I don't think there's any question. I think a lot of you, were able to get on to the PPP, if not some of the other programs that were out there that allowed you to get funding, and hopefully you won't have to repay it. It's helped you get through, as basically what we had was a situation where the government was paying wages and some of the operating expenses for businesses that couldn't generate the level of business due to government actions in part, and the concerns that people had in terms of shopping and buying and uncertainty about the economy. And so what the government was doing was paying the way for large numbers of businesses, and millions upon millions, estimates of over 10 million, if not more, workers that were being directly or indirectly supported by government funding programs. The first bill got us through into the fall, helped us get through the summer and the fall. The second bill was a much smaller, scaled down one, but it's going to help us at least get into the spring. But it's not enough to keep things going. And what we have right now is a race to vaccinate people and a race to keep the business sector going, and also household spending. Because keep in mind, the enhanced unemployment compensation programs put large amounts of money into households' hands. Despite all the shutdowns, despite all the problems in the economy, personal income grew at an enormous rate in 2020. How did that happen? It didn't happen because the economy expanded. It happened because the government, through the $600 a week, or now the $300 a week added payments, through the fact that small businesses, LLCs, subchapter S's, gig workers, all of us became eligible for unemployment compensation of some kind. So we were able to get funds that we wouldn't have been eligible for in the past. The stimulus bills really were the things that kept the economy alive. Without them, we would have been in a really long and deeper recession than we went into. We've largely come out of it at this particular point, but we're still far behind. Imagine what would have happened if we didn't have those enhanced unemployment payments, the pandemic, the emergency pandemic payments to businesses, gig workers, and so on that supported them, not just the PPP that helped pay wages and some operating expenses. So all of these were government funding. We have another stimulus bill, but it's not enough. It's not enough because right now it's fairly clear to most economists the economy can't stand on its own. Ultimately, we're going to have to get to that. And that's really going to be the critical aspect. And I'll talk about that, in a couple of minutes, because some of the bad things that we're facing is that while a lot of businesses have come back, they're still being supported by the government. So those are the good things, the fact that we have vaccines and the vaccine process coming on, even though it's not going as well as we'd hoped for it, and the stimulus bill, and hopefully an additional stimulus bill. My expectation is that the Democrats, who are now in control of both Congress and the presidency, have been the key to pushing the second stimulus bill, and will probably push for a third stimulus bill. I think Biden has made it clear already that what the second stimulus bill was simply a down payment. We're going to be needing a third one, and I expect that to happen. What about the bad at this particular point? Well, as we all know, if the vaccine and the economy are linked together, the question is, how fast can we get vaccinated? And right now, the slow vaccine rollout has been a real problem and a significant problem. And it looks like right now it's going to take until the fall, at least, to get enough people vaccinated that we can pretty much begin to believe we'll be getting back to, what will be whatever is the new normal. And I don't know necessarily what the new normal is looking like. So the first bad is we haven't rolled out the vaccine as quickly as we should be and that we need to, and that's going to extend out the recovery period, probably at least another 3 to 4 months. And instead of the spring and early summer, we're looking at the fall to early winter as far as getting back to that place. The second thing, which affects the economy, but really is more into the micro aspects of the economy, not necessarily the economy as a whole, is the simple idea that there were huge changes that will affect the growth of businesses and the growth of house and the expansion of households, but on a geographic basis. Think about it. We've been working at home. We're afraid of density at this particular point. The virus, the shutdowns, the uncertainty this has created may, and I use the term may because we can't be certain exactly what that is, but it may affect where businesses and where households locate. Okay? So what we have is a situation like this. Households have been working from home. The work from home trend may or may not be extended. We don't know the extent that that's the case. But to the extent that that happens, and I expect it will happen because businesses have learned that they can have their people be productive, if not very productive, working at home, then what we have is a situation where we're changing household location. If we're changing household location, we're changing where demand is. Think about center cities. Think about New York City. Think about Newark. Think about Philadelphia. Think about the cities around the country. If people aren't going into work, there are large numbers of businesses, what I call the microeconomies in those cities, that depend on large numbers of people for their sales, whether it be restaurants, coffee shops, but suppliers of one form or another, people that are selling goods, people that are providing services. If you cut, I was on a conversation with a group of people looking into this and interviewing people, business people in groups, and they were saying anything close to a 10% reduction in the number of people working in a downtown area could cause large numbers of businesses to go out of business. That's going to affect the urban areas dramatically. On the other side of that, of course, what it does is it transfers that kind of demand into the locations where people are living. So you're seeing a change in demand and a change in the structure of demand into the suburban areas themselves. And I think you've probably seen it here in some of the Ocean County, especially shore communities. If density is out, if people are more willing to work at home and they are working at home, then what you're seeing is people moving more permanently to less dense locations, smaller cities, towns, and the shore communities are benefiting dramatically from that. To the extent that that continues, that's actually going to be a positive for the Ocean County communities that can attract those kinds of workers who are working from home and living at home now. And that's going to affect the levels of demand and the structure of demand, because now you're not necessarily going to be as seasonal an economy as you've had in the past. With more people living in these areas, the demand will be spread out more. It's not that it's going to be 12 months a year, but the ups and downs will be less than we've seen it before that. So you've got the work from home trend that's going to affect things. The second thing is it affects business locations. If businesses are finding that they don't need to be in high density central city locations, they now can also locate outside of those areas. So what you're going to start seeing, and I think we're starting to see this, is decisions being made by businesses that they'll locate outside of the cities. We had what were called either a re-centralization of the population and the re-centralization of businesses for about 4 to 5 years. And if you listened to me a year ago, if I had come to you a year ago, I would have said, the future was central cities and high density. Now that's brought into question, because if businesses are not having as many people in their central location, in high density locations, they don't need to be located there. That affects the demand for commercial real estate in cities, but it also then affects the demand for commercial real estate outside of those locations. So if businesses are looking to have more satellite locations, to cut back on their center city locations or even move out of them, not necessarily the bigger businesses, but some of them won't necessarily move, but they will cut down the space needs. It's going to change dramatically the structure of demand for commercial real estate as well. And while high density locations may get hurt, lower density locations, desirable places to live all the time. I spent 5 months in my Margate house because I could do that. My wife was teaching from our kitchen table for that period of time. That's an example of the ways that things, can work and may continue to work. Not necessarily in education, but I don't need to be anywhere, and I can live anywhere. So why not live where I want to live? And I'd much rather live in my shore house than my Pennsylvania house. So those are the kinds of trains and the changes they're going to have. So less density is out, but less density is now back in. We don't know the extent to which that will actually occur, but it's going to continue to occur to some extent, at least. So that's the bad to some extent, but the good for you. The ugly is the politics, and there's no question that we are in a radicalization period, hate, and the question we face is, can Congress even get along? We had over 140, members of Congress vote against certifying electors. That's not making an awful lot of Democrats happy. And they have to ask the question, how do you repair that? Okay? It's not clear how that gets repaired. Can Congress work together to get anything done? How can the Democrats and Republicans work together when there was such a different view on what went on the election? And now, of course, we've had what happened last week and the implications of that, at least as far as the future is concerned. So the ugly, and I wrote a piece that appeared in the Sunday Inquirer. I wrote that before Wednesday's attack on the Capitol, where I said the ugly, was the dysfunction and the uncertainty in Congress, and that's going to be a real major issue. So can we get another stimulus bill? I think we do, but what will it look like? Will be, Congress, the Democrats may control it, but they control it, very, very, with a very thin majority, and in the Senate, they don't have a majority. They have the vice president. Under those sets of circumstances, what will we get out of Congress? And we need to do so much. And it doesn't look like, at least to me right now, that there's a lot of people who are willing to compromise. You put this together, and what do you get? You get a national economy that may, we're going to get over the short-term blip that we had at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, because the virus went crazy and there were significant shutdowns because people basically didn't care anymore. They suffered from, virus overload, and they traveled, and they helped create the resurgence and the out of control virus. We will start seeing that come down as we work into the spring. Reopenings are occurring. We're seeing that every day. The governor's done that. We're seeing that in Pennsylvania and other states. And that will lead to an increase in growth. Then as confidence improves, growth should increase a little bit more. But the real thing that worries me is this. There was dramatic damage done to businesses. They've been holding on because the government supported them. Ultimately, the stimulus packages have to end. And a lot of these businesses, which what I call zombie businesses, are ultimately not going to be able to make it once they're on their own. As I said, we're 10 million, our employment level is 10 million lower than it was a year ago. The unemployment rate is still 3% above it. The demand is just not there, and the demand is being driven by government funding. So we are going to, I think it's possible, we hit a second level of slowdown once we, as the government stimulus begins to be withdrawn, and businesses have to stand on their own. And a lot of the businesses, unfortunately, think about what's going to happen in the center cities when those businesses are going to wake up, have to make their own, pay their workers out of their own earnings, not the government transfers, and find out that the demand is down 10, 15, or 20% because of the change in the structure of where people are working and where businesses are located. So we run into, I believe, sometime in the second half of the year, probably more towards the fall and early winter, of a second slowdown. I'm not talking about a recession, but a second slowdown. And that's something to keep in mind. We may have a good economy into the spring and maybe even to the summer, but don't necessarily assume we're going to grow even faster from there, because the government can't keep this up. Financially, it's just impossible. Now, what does it mean for the state? Well, the state's financial situation is a disaster because of the lack of revenues. There's going to be a financial reckoning, and the state's going to have to make some very, very hard decisions on spending and on taxes, because the budget is way out of whack, and it's just being put together also partially by teachers, fire, members of the fire and police departments, social workers, and so on. These are things we need to continue, and we're going to lose those people unless the government's finances get back together. That's going to be a problem in the state, and the state has been having some issues. The job loss in this state has been significantly greater on a percentage basis than the national job loss is. The unemployment rate is not that different, but the job loss has been really disturbing. And that has an implication for the state economy and the state finances, and I'm concerned about that. And finally, there's the local and the Ocean County region. I think I've touched on that to a very large extent. I think what we have is that the trends are in place that benefit the Ocean County region. As I talked about, the changes in location, in household location, in business locations. It may take a while, but the one concern, the biggest concern I have for the Ocean County economy is that it's heavily driven by small businesses. This is not an economy driven by big businesses. And the warning I gave you just a couple of minutes ago is that when the economy has to stand on its own, the businesses most at risk are the small businesses. So my caution to you is do your best. Get yourself in as good a situation as possible, because the stimulus money is going to run out sometime this year, probably by the end of the summer into the early fall. And that's when you're going to have to make it. And so caution is the word, even if the economy looks better. And let me leave you on that, which is a cautionary tale in the midst of what I think, at least for the Ocean County economy, is a very positive, longer term story, that once we get through that transition from government to support the private sector activity, I think this area will grow better and stronger than we would have without what happened. And that may be the only silver lining in this disaster. Okay, I'm going to take some questions. So we have about 5-6 minutes to take questions. If you have any, please ask them. Please type them in, because, as I said, I'm willing to stay. We've always had great questions in the past. While I'm waiting for the questions to be asked, let me add one more thing that people might be interested in, because you're seeing it now. What about interest rates? Well, very quickly, as far as interest rates are concerned, short term, the Fed is not going to be raising rates for at least 2 more years and maybe longer. As far as long-term interest rates, I think we've seen the rates react, but that's because the levels of the longer-term rates, which affect mortgages and longer-term borrowing, were way too low. They were assuming a longer-term slow down and slow growth period than was realistic. I think we're closer to more realistic levels of rates. I don't think the long term rates will keep gapping up. We may even see a pullback, but I think we move basically from here, but slowly, but much not dramatically. We've even seen that. Okay, question. Talk about MNT. When does the bill come due for all this stimulus? The bill comes due in two different ways. Okay, and the first way is, when do businesses, have to prove that they don't have to pay anything back? That's coming up. There's no question about that. But my view on this is that there's going to be quite an understanding about the circumstances. And a lot of those loans will ultimately turn out to be largely grants, if not full grants. The other side about that, though, and I think that that's going to be the case, even if we get additional stimulus. I think even the Democrats, who have been rarely willing to supply, in essence, free money to the business community, and this is what it's all about, understood that that was needed to essentially get us through. Keep in mind, the stimulus, was a crutch. It wasn't a cure. Okay, and that's why I said before that we're ultimately going to have to, face the music. There are and I think, though, to some extent, we're going to start facing the music in the spring and into the summer. For those of you who borrowed and really didn't, either had loans or didn't meet the requirements to turn the PPP into grants. In terms of the government budget deficits, well, I don't think it's going to be for a while. I don't think, there may be politicians who are saying, oh, gee, we can't do more because we have a huge, budget deficit. The reality is that those are the same people that helped create it. And at the same time, they're the same people who also recognize that, we needed and we continue to need the support for the business sector. So on that note, we have about a minute or two. Lori, do we have time for one more? I don't have any more questions.
No, I don't see that we have any more questions right now, but I certainly know that we're going to encourage people to reach out to you directly, continue to contact the chamber as things progress. Some people might have more than just one simple answer or question for things, so we'll work on getting them what they need and be in contact with you.
Okay, and let me just finish this with one major, comment. Over the next 6 months, the best economic program for this area, for the Ocean County area, and for the small businesses, is to maintain the stimulus, as I said. So to the extent you communicate with, your representatives, it matters. It matters not just for the business community, but for the state and local governments as well. Let me end on that point, okay? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Joel, for your valuable insight. We really do appreciate that.